One night in southwestern China, a diver slipped into a dark river, dug his hands into the mud of the riverbed, and came up holding a solid gold royal seal, its handle carved into the shape of a roaring tiger. He sold it, and the rest of that one night's haul, for about $2 million. He wasn't lucky. He was following a treasure legend, a 370-year-old story about a rebel king's fortune at the bottom of that river, a story every expert had dismissed as a fairy tale. Think of America's Oak Island, 200 years of digging, TV shows, millions spent, and nothing. This was China's Oak Island, except the treasure was actually there. So China did something almost unbelievable. They dammed the river, pumped it dry, and dug. What came out of that riverbed, 76,000 pieces of gold and silver, confirmed the old legend, cracked the biggest treasure-looting case in Chinese history, and told the story of one of the bloodiest warlords who ever lived. Tonight, the river of gold, what was found, what it's worth, and the even greater treasures still missing. Every treasure has an owner, and this one belonged to one of the most terrifying men in Chinese history. His name was Zhang Xianzhong, and he was born into poverty in Shanxi province in 1606 in the dying decades of the Ming Dynasty. And the Ming was dying spectacularly. After nearly 3 centuries of rule, the dynasty was rotting from corruption at the top, while drought and famine scoured the countryside. Starving peasants, taxed into ruin by a swollen aristocracy, began forming rebel bands, and then rebel armies. Out of this chaos rose Zhang, a tall, physically imposing former Ming soldier with a booming voice and a gift for war, known by the nickname the Yellow Tiger. He deserted the crumbling army, joined the rebels, and rose fast, a brilliant, brutal commander who could rally desperate men by the tens of thousands. For years, Zhang cut a path across China, and this is where the treasure begins, because Zhang's specialty was plunder. His armies stormed cities and, above all, the palaces of the Ming princes, the sprawling network of imperial relatives who had been granted county-sized estates and had spent generations hoarding the wealth squeezed from the peasantry. Zhang broke them open one after another and stripped them bare. Gold, silver, jewelry, the ceremonial treasures of the imperial clan itself. Everything flowed into the Yellow Tiger's war chest. And if lost treasure and history that turns out stranger than fiction is your kind of thing, take 1 second and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel, and there's plenty more coming. Now, back to the warlord. In 1644, the same year the Ming Dynasty finally collapsed and the Manchu invaders from the north began founding the Qing Dynasty. Zhang seized the rich province of Sichuan, took its capital Chengdu, and declared his own state, the Daxi, the Kingdom of the Great West. He even proclaimed himself emperor. He minted his own coins, stamped his own silver, issued his own royal seals. For a brief moment, the Yellow Tiger had gone from starving peasant to self-made monarch sitting on one of the great fortunes of the age. But his reign is remembered for something far darker. The historical accounts of Zhang's rule in Sichuan describe cruelty on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Massacres, terror as a routine tool of government, a province drowned in blood. Sichuan was catastrophically depopulated in these years, and traditional histories lay millions of deaths at Zhang's feet. Modern historians urge some caution here. The death tolls in old chronicles are likely inflated, and the devastation of Sichuan was compounded by years of war, famine, and the brutal Qing conquest that followed. Zhang's court chroniclers were his enemies, and monsters make useful propaganda. But even the careful scholarly view leaves him as one of history's most violent rulers, a gifted commander with, as one historian put it, a genuinely unbalanced mind. Keep that in your head as we talk about his gold, because every bar of it is plunder, and much of it is soaked in blood. This is not a pirate movie. It's the fortune of a catastrophe. And in 1646, the catastrophe came for him, because in the summer of 1646, the Yellow Tiger's empire was collapsing, and he made the decision that created one of the greatest sunken treasures on earth. Zhang's kingdom of the Great West was caught in a vice. From the south, armies still loyal to the remnants of the Ming were pressing in. From the north came the far more terrifying threat, the Qing, the Manchu conquerors who were methodically swallowing all of China. Chengdu was running out of food. Zhang decided to abandon his capital, and he was not leaving the money behind. By the accounts, his men loaded a river fleet, tradition says as many as 1,000 boats, with the accumulated plunder of his entire career, the gold and silver of a dozen looted princely palaces, the treasury of his own short-lived empire. Among the cargo, wonderfully, were containers straight out of a legend. Whole tree trunks split lengthwise, hollowed out, packed tight with silver ingots, and clamped back together with iron bands, floating wooden vaults, exactly as the old Qing records described them. The fleet, carrying tens of thousands of troops, pushed down the river from Chengdu. They made it about as far as a town called Jiangkou, where the Jin River meets the Min. And there, the trap was sprung. A Ming loyalist general named Xianzhong was waiting in ambush. Fire arrows and cannon tore into the treasure fleet. Boats burned, collided, capsized, and the war chest of the great Western Kingdom, the wooden vaults of silver, the chests of gold, the royal seals of a self-made emperor, went down into the muddy water at the river junction. Zhang himself escaped the ambush, but not his fate. Months later, in early 1647, with the Qing closing in, the Yellow Tiger was killed by tradition, cut down by a Manchu archer. His kingdom evaporated, and at the bottom of the Min River, under the silt, a stupendous fortune settled into the dark, and began its transformation from fact into fairy tale. The treasure was never a secret. That's the delicious part. Everyone knew. The locals knew that's where the rhyme came from, passed down for 3 centuries, where the stone dragon faces the stone tiger, referring to old carved landmarks near the river junction. The gold and silver lie in numbers too big to count. Fishermen occasionally pulled up a stray coin and fed the legend. And the powerful knew too, and they tried again and again to take it. Under the Qing Dynasty, officials made attempts to salvage the riverbed. In the warlord era of the early 20th century, the strongman Yuan Shikai's circle and later Sichuan's warlords poured money and men into hunting the horde. Even Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government reportedly took its shot. Every attempt failed. The Min River is wide, fast, and deep in silt. The treasure wasn't sitting on the bottom. It was buried meters under the bottom, scattered along a stretch of riverbed by centuries of current. Without modern technology, looking for it was like searching a moving desert with a spoon. Generation after generation walked away empty-handed, and the treasure song settled ever deeper into the category of myth. By the modern era, the official view was blunt, just a folktale. Then came 2005 and a construction crew, because the legend didn't come back to life through archaeologists. It came back through crime. In 2005, workers on a construction project by the river at Jiangkou dug up 7 silver ingots, genuine Ming Dynasty silver, stamped and inscribed. Quiet excitement rippled through the archaeological world. The site was eventually placed under protection, and it even got an official name, Jiangkou Chenyin, the sunken silver at the river mouth. But no one yet grasped the scale of what was down there. The looters figured it out first. Word of the ingots spread, and where scholars saw a research question, the local underworld saw a bank vault with no guard. Over the following years, treasure hunters began slipping into the Min River at night, some with wetsuits, air compressors, even metal detectors adapted for underwater work. And one of them, the diver from the start of our story, hit the jackpot of a lifetime. Feeling through the darkness of the riverbed, he came up with objects out of a dream, rare gold and silver ceremonial items, and that solid gold seal, its handle sculpted as a crouching tiger, inscribed as the seal of the Grand Marshal of Yongcheng, cast in 1643. A royal seal from the heart of the rebellion, an object connected to Xianzhong himself. He sold his haul to a private collector for 13.6 million yuan, around 2 million US dollars. For one-night dive, that kind of money doesn't stay quiet. More and more looted pieces began surfacing on the black market, and the authorities finally moved. The police investigation that followed became, by official accounts, the largest cultural relics looting case ever cracked in China. Around 10 looting gangs broken up, some 70 traffickers arrested, and hundreds of artifacts of major historical importance recovered. A recovered haul whose reported value ran into the hundreds of millions of yuan, tens of millions of dollars. The message of the bust was unmistakable. The treasure song was true. And if thieves with scuba gear could pull imperial gold out of that river, it was time for the professionals to see what was really down there. What China did next is my favorite part of this whole story because it sounds like something out of a heist film, except run by archaeologists. You can't excavate a riverbed underwater with any precision. So, beginning in January 2017, in the dry season, the team from the Sichuan Provincial Institute did the audacious thing. They built temporary cofferdams across sections of the Min River, brought in banks of pumps, and drained the water away, turning stretches of living river into an open-air archaeological site. Then they dug, down through roughly 5 meters of silt and gravel to the bedrock, where the heavy gold and silver, sifted downward by 370 years of current, had come to rest in the crevices. Within 2 months, they had over 10,000 objects, and they kept going season after season. From 2016 to 2023, 6 major excavations across some 250 acres of riverbed. The final count is staggering, roughly 76,000 artifacts recovered, overwhelmingly gold and silver. Ingots by the crate, many stamped with tax inscriptions naming the very counties Zhang had plundered, a ledger of conquest written in precious metal. Coins minted by his rebel kingdom. Gold and silver jewelry, hairpins, everyday luxuries, weapons, swords, spearheads, gun barrels, and melted lumps of precious metal that still carry the heat scars of the battle that sank them. They even found the wooden vaults, the hollowed tree trunks packed with silver, exactly matching the 300-year-old descriptions. And the royal treasures, the gold investiture books of Ming princes, the physical documents of imperial power, looted from palace after palace, and gold seals of the imperial clan, including a massive golden seal of a Ming prince's heir, several kilograms of nearly pure gold found deliberately broken into pieces, smashed, perhaps, by the rebel who wanted the old dynasty's sacred objects destroyed or cut up simply as bullion. Either way, the fall of an empire, frozen in one broken block of gold. So the question you've been waiting for, what is all this actually worth? Let's take it in layers, honestly. The legend itself gives a number. The hoard was rumored at 100 million taels of silver. Call it nearly 9 million pounds of the metal. Take that figure literally, and it is legend, not accounting. And the silver alone, at today's prices, would run into the billions of dollars before a single artifact's historical value is counted. The market gives us harder numbers at the bottom end. One looter's single night of finds sold for about $2 million, and the recovered stolen artifacts from the police case were valued in the tens of millions. But here's the honest truth that the archaeologists would insist on. For the great pieces, the tiger seal, the golden books, the shattered prince's seal, melt value is meaningless. These are one-of-a-kind national treasures, the kind of objects that are never legally sold, and whose real worth is closer to a museum gets built around them. Which is exactly what happened. A dedicated museum for the Jiangkou treasure opened on the banks of the river in 2024. The fairy tale now has a gift shop, and here is the thought that should keep you up tonight. Jiangkou proved that the old legends can be true, that fortunes really are still out there, waiting. So what else is still missing from Chinese history? The answer: treasures that make the river of gold look modest. Start with the greatest of them all, the heirloom seal of the realm. Carved, according to tradition, from the most famous piece of jade in Chinese history, this was the imperial seal, created for the first emperor over 2,000 years ago and passed from dynasty to dynasty as the literal, physical mandate of heaven. To hold it was to be the legitimate ruler of China. And roughly 1,000 years ago, in the chaos of a collapsing dynasty, it vanished, by one account lost when a doomed emperor burned himself in his palace. It has never been seen since. Its value? There is no number. It is the single most important lost object in Chinese civilization, the crown jewel of crown jewels. If it surfaced tomorrow, it would instantly be among the most valuable objects on Earth. Then there's a loss measured not in gold but in knowledge, the Peking man fossils. The 750,000-year-old remains of Homo erectus, among the most important human origin fossils ever discovered, were packed up for safekeeping in December 1941 as war engulfed China. And somewhere in the chaos of those weeks, the crates simply vanished. Lost in transit, buried, sunk, stolen, no one knows. Rewards have been offered for decades. Scientifically, they are irreplaceable, priceless in the most literal sense. For the art lovers, the Orchid Pavilion Preface, the most celebrated work of calligraphy in Chinese history, brushed in the year 353. The original vanished centuries ago. The strongest tradition says a Tang emperor loved it so much he had it buried with him, meaning it may still exist, sealed in an unopened imperial tomb. What would it be worth? Consider that surviving works by later, lesser masters have sold at auction for $40, $50, $60 million and more. The original Orchid Pavilion preface would obliterate every record in the history of the art market. Some would call it, ounce for ounce, the most valuable object in China, if it survives. And finally, the treasure that is missing by the ton, the plunder of the old summer palace. In 1860, foreign troops looted and burned the Ming, the vast imperial garden palace outside Beijing, and by Chinese estimates on the order of 1 million-plus objects were carried off and scattered across the world. We know what fragments of it fetch, because pieces surface at auction. The famous bronze zodiac animal heads from a palace fountain have sold for the equivalent of $10 to $20 million each for what were, functionally, decorative waterspouts. The full looted inventory, the porcelains, jades, paintings, treasures of the emperors, represents billions of dollars of heritage, scattered through museums, private collections, and attics around the globe, resurfacing piece by piece, decade after decade. Which brings us back to a riverbank in Sichuan and a children's rhyme. For 300 years, that song was the definition of a tall tale, the thing serious people smiled at. Grandmothers sang it. Officials dismissed it. Warlords and presidents chased it and gave up. And the whole time, 5 meters under the riverbed, 76,000 pieces of gold and silver were lying in the bedrock, waiting exactly where the song said they were. The stone dragon really did face the stone tiger. The fortune really was there, in numbers almost too big to count. There's a lesson in that, and it's the reason stories like this one matter. History's legends are not always inflation and fantasy. Sometimes they are memory, compressed, rhymed, handed down by people who saw the boats burn and told their children, who told theirs. The Jiangkou treasure spent 3 centuries filed under myth, and it was testimony all along. So think about that unopened Tang tomb that may hold the greatest artwork in Chinese history. The crates of irreplaceable fossils that went missing in 1941. The jade seal of the first emperor, unseen for 1,000 years. Somewhere, some of these are not gone, just waiting like the silver under the Ming River, for the moment someone finally takes the old stories seriously. The river gave up its secret. The others are still out there. If this one hooked you, tell me in the comments which lost treasure you think will be found next. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. There are more buried fortunes, lost relics, and legends turned true still to come.